Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Roger Brooks. I'm the founder, CEO of RBrooks Group, a retained C-suite search firm. And what an interesting segue into some great optimism from what I heard. So I think we've got a great story here of strategics who have gotten involved early, despite what maybe others think. We have got a company going after a pharma market that has some incredible upside that's, I think, far different than what was portrayed. I don't know if you guys didn't get to listen to all of it, but it wasn't necessarily all positive on our industry. So we'd like to, why don't we go through, everybody can kind of introduce themselves, and then we'll have Ankit tell the story a bit about SetPoint to frame it for people who don't know the story. And where our condolences to Murthy, who's not able to be with us. He's the CEO of SetPoint. His father passed away over the weekend. So we have Ankit here to represent the company. So let's go.
Thanks, Roger. Yeah, Juan-Pablo Mas. I'm an investor at Action Potential Venture Capital, which up until December of 2025 was a subsidiary of GlaxoSmithKline, the pharma company. I also wear two hats and now manage a portfolio and including SetPoint Medical out of a fund called Synapse Fund, which is a partnership with SR1, our prior sister fund at GSK. And prior to those roles, I had the pleasure of working at Morgan Thaler Ventures and Lightstone Ventures. And at Morgan Thaler, which I know we'll get into, was where I first learned about SetPoint Medical and became involved sort of in the 2010 timeframe. So a long history with the company and, historically having focused at Action Potential largely in neuromodulation.
I'm Brandon Rice. I run the global healthcare team at Piper Sandler. I'm a medtech banker by background. I spend most all of my time with disruptive technology companies like SetPoint. So companies that are coming in and doing, really innovative things in really attractive markets. I've had the good fortune of taking, quite a number of the companies that you've seen public, and have had a good fortune of having a long relationship with the company.
Right. Ankit, Shah, Roger, LSI, thanks for having SetPoint Medical here on the podium and sharing our story. I joined SetPoint Medical in 2018 to lead up our commercial efforts. Prior to SetPoint, I was at Intersect ENT, and prior to that, I was at Medtronic. But it's been a phenomenal journey over the last 7 years or so, taking this from a clinical study design stage company to now where we're at with FDA approval since last July. Happy to share more as we go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zack Scott. I'm a general partner at Norwest, which is a Bay Area venture capital and growth equity firm. We have a $15.5 billion under management. We're currently investing out of our Fund 17, which is a $3 billion fund that we started investing a couple of years ago. I led the Series C financing at SetPoint. Actually, that was my first deal that I did when I joined Norwest, but I had, similar to Juan-Pablo, had been following the company for several years and had always thought it was a very compelling opportunity, and which I'll get into more. And in terms of my background, I've been working in healthcare venture capital a little over 20 years now, and actually started off my adult life in medicine. So I trained as a general surgeon, and so kind of approach a lot of my investments from that more clinical perspective.
I'm Josh Makower. I lead Stanford Biodesign. But my part of the SetPoint story is in my role sort of in venture capital. It's funny when Zack said Series C. That's because I reset the. That's more like a C prime because there was a reset that I led when I got involved with the company back in 2015, just to try to reset the strategy, and played a role in bringing on Murthy and also David Chernoff, the medical director there. And then when I left NEA, I joined Elevage Medical that led the most recent round for SetPoint. So I'm back on the board, so I'm happy to be involved.
Yeah. It's interesting how a few of us have a couple touch points, investments from different
coming back.
In the same
Exactly.
Yeah, well, it's a good story. Well, why don't we have Ankit, for those people who do not understand SetPoint, who they are, what they do, maybe you can frame it up and maybe speak about the clinical implications of this therapy and why it's such a big deal. And that's why we're on the stage, by the way, because there's a lot of companies here, but this is one of those stories that's going to catch a lot of people by surprise about its enormous potential valuation impact on patients. So go ahead, Ankit.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Roger. So SetPoint Medical is developing a neuromodulation-based therapy to treat autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, inflammatory bowel disease. Drugs of the multi-billion-dollar category typically are used to treat these conditions. And not only are these conditions incredibly debilitating, but they're also, the therapies used are bankrupting our healthcare system. For example, for rheumatoid arthritis, in the United States, we spend $30 billion a year just on the therapeutics used for treating these drugs. Our approach is device-based. Obviously, we're at a medical device meeting. And what we do is electrically stimulate the vagus nerve with a small implant that's placed on the left side of the neck. The implant's the size of the Philip pin here. And what we've demonstrated is that by stimulating the right nerve fibers at the right pulse parameters for just 1 minute a day, we render the immune cells quiescent, reset the immunologic set point, hence the company's name. And clinically, we've demonstrated we have efficacy that is on par with the best-in-class biologics and the JAK inhibitors used to treat rheumatoid arthritis. Without the immunosuppressive safety issues that are related to those drugs, and at a total cost of care that is lower than the current therapy. So that's the value proposition. The way the mechanism works is when you stimulate the vagus nerve, it has a downstream effect on the immune system through the spleen, and so there is a chemical amplification of the signal process there, and that's what changes the signs and symptoms and the actual biology of the body.
Thank you, Ankit. Now there's a lot of science behind this company, and for science-driven companies, there's that trap they can fall into where they keep doing research and more and more science. Juan-Pablo was involved first. You're closest to it, I think, initially. Maybe talk a bit about, we're all here to learn from each other, and there's a lot of things that can be learned from SetPoint. Talk about what you saw within SetPoint and how you, as an investor, kept them from digging too deep into this, doing the right amount of science, but not too much. So how do you think about that, and how did you guide that as a board member?
Yeah, no, and I can't take credit for the earliest inception, and certainly to call out the folks who were involved at the very beginning. So obviously, Kevin Tracy and the Feinstein Institute were central in discovery of this mechanism, and this was in the early 2000s. The company was formed and first check was brought in 2007, but alongside Kevin Tracy were Jim Broderick, who was a partner at Morgan Thaler Ventures, one of my partners, who saw the potential. He's traditionally a biotech investor. I think SetPoint was his first foray into medical devices. Paul Peter Tack was an investigator that did many of the first cases in Amsterdam. So some of these folks were, and you can look back at the papers, there's a great PNAS paper on the history of the mechanism understanding and so forth. That was the foundation. I didn't get involved. I joined Morgan Thaler from Stanford Business School in 2010. So I was exposed to this company. It was already in motion, but it certainly struck me, was consistent with this interest that both Morgan Thaler as a firm, as well as my personal interest in devices for multi-billion-dollar drug markets, and this was kind of going squarely at it. Not only that, it also was the inspiration for my later employer, GlaxoSmithKline, and the formation of Action Potential. SetPoint was the hallmark company in bioelectronic medicines that got the CEO of GSK and the CSO of GSK to stand up and say this is a sector, and sort of calling back to the last panel where pharma was investing in ways to disrupt itself, but this is a sector we believe will disrupt the biotech and pharmaceutical industry. So that being the backdrop, the company certainly, Tony Arnold was a CEO at the time when I joined or when I was involved. This was about taking early clinical signal in initially open label studies where patients were their own control. Where, I think the thing that really got a lot of early investors excited about the therapy was, biomarkers such as like a synovial biopsy and looking at cytokine levels in the fluids in the joints where RA is known to manifest and cause, the symptoms for patients. We saw that level drop in a sort of a double crossover manner. So you'd take a baseline synovial biopsy, measure cytokine levels high, stimulate, take another sample, which is needle drawn, see that level drop, and then turn off stimulation and eventually see that return. And so that was one of those aha moments, I think, for early investors. In terms of getting too far into the science, I would say that the management was actually quite good at driving a device playbook in terms of getting that clinical data into a randomized trial, into the pivotal study. That journey took longer for the company, in part because the early clinical data was derived by use of a off-the-shelf or existing commercial vagus nerve stimulator, traditional IPG-based Canon lead system. And it was a big strategic decision, certainly in the development of the product, to determine whether or not to move forward with that style of product, that size of a device, versus investing in the R&D cycle to develop a microstimulator, which, in hindsight, certainly cost dollars and time, meaningful dollars and time. But looking at commercial, product market fit for a sector where rheumatologists typically are writing scripts and not referring to surgery, that was a much more, and as we hope proves to be a more amenable solution and approachable solution for patients, considering SetPoint. So I would say it's kind of a mix of the scientific learnings and the R&D product development strategic decisions that were instrumental. I think we've certainly landed in the right place, but it was a long journey, and obviously as Josh mentioned, was involved in some of the early recruitment of Murthy to the team, who's brought yet another layer to what will deliver on the potential, hopefully.
Yeah. So in hindsight, was that a good idea to use an off-the-shelf product, or would it have been better to initially design and develop your own product for clinical?
Yeah, I don't think...
With hindsight.
Yeah, I'm curious what others think, but I don't think you would have invested in developing a microstimulator hoping that it might work on a new indication where the physiology had to be validated in humans. Kevin did great work in animals, in preclinical models, but you really needed to get a signal.
I think having that kind of a minimally viable product for your first trial to get to that signal was critical. Otherwise, it would have been really hard to raise the capital. You would have probably, I don't know how much we spent on the development, tens of millions of dollars to get a product before knowing that it works. So I thought it was a very smart move.
And for those in the audience, what they did is they used the LivaNova vagus stimulator that's being used for epilepsy, and they used that as an off-the-shelf product to test out the RA or autoimmune science around the device. So they didn't develop their own product initially, which is tens of millions to get a new IPG developed.
And then I think one of our big competitive advantages that we did take that information and the uniqueness of our therapy is, which is Ankit mentioned before, is that it's only a 1 minute stimulation a day, which means that you don't need to have a big battery in terms for this to work. And if anyone has a family member with a spinal cord stimulator, like having a can in your body is not a good, not well accepted by patients. It's a pretty big limiter to adoption. So be able to really create a very unique form factor device that fits into how the therapy works, I think is now going to be a huge competitive advantage for the company for years to come.
So Zack is one of the more recent investors in the company. How did turn it into some things that entrepreneurs can walk away with? When you started digging into SetPoint, what became compelling to you, and what are the lessons learned for others that are trying to raise capital? You look at hundreds of deals a year. How do they get your attention, and what stands out in the diligence, the process, the presentation that captures you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Peter alluded to this earlier on the previous panel. I mean, I had a gut reaction when I heard about the therapy. I have family members with Crohn's disease and multiple sclerosis. And, you know, when I was in medical school back in the 90s is when the biologics first emerged on the market. So I got to watch them as patients evolve through that journey. And those, as everyone knows, have been amazing advancements, but they have significant limitations. And so, which Ankit alluded to in terms of the risk for infections and certain types of cancers. You have to give yourself an injection every 2 to 4 weeks, and you feel pretty yucky for a couple of days after that. And as Juan-Pablo and Ankit both mentioned, it's a huge cost burden to the system. And so what was particularly compelling to me at the time was what we were alluding to before was that product market fit that what got me excited about the company is that they had a deep understanding of the problem in the market. It wasn't just kind of rinse and repeating like you're seeing a little bit on the drug side of finding another way to block the immune system. They really kind of understood the issue from a patient perspective. So the product market fit and the patient feedback that we'd gotten at the time we made the investment, less than 25% of patients that are on biologics are satisfied with the therapy. And then when you really push them on their experience, that drops probably into the single-digit percentages. And so that was a really compelling part of the story that they kind of really have understood the market. And I think that's a key for any entrepreneur is that, like SetPoint, we have a huge market opportunity beyond RA, and that was the third attractive piece. But the fact that they had identified a key market to go into, it was very kind of what we call it the no option patient. Like when this patient comes into the physician's office, they will immediately think of SetPoint. And so having that kind of obvious entry point with limited competition, and then as I mentioned earlier, the potential to keep building out upon that, just like the drug companies have done in the autoimmune space. So it's kind of the combination of product market fit, a great entry point, and then the expansion story to follow after.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
And Josh, once you continue on with that, but yeah. I think of I wonder how much the disrupting the pharma market plays to your LPs and your investment team when they look at something like this, and how important that is.
Yeah, I mean, in medical devices, we are, I think, always looking for very big market opportunities, and I struggle to find one that is as big as this. And also the fact is that this market opportunity has already been realized with these biopharmaceuticals. So the opportunity is already there. People are already choosing a solution for this condition, despite all the tremendous complications. And to offer a device solution that could be exceptionally cost effective in the long run, not require, the rest of your life being on one of these biologics, and offer the benefits without the complications was just really compelling. And so the system is already paying for it. And I think that, as we start to, get into further execution, the insurance companies are going to realize they can actually save a lot of money by betting on this versus biologics. And I think it's going to be a really significant threat to the existing pharma and create what could be one of the biggest medical device markets ever for anything. So that's why it's exciting.
I think it's going to.
That's it.
I think the FOMO is real. There's going to be people who just missed it. But there's a lot of people participated, and think of participation that we've got. 3 strategics that have invested? Mm-hmm. Maybe we tackle that. That's something that's always on people's top of their mind. Do we pull in a strategic? Do we not? How complicated is it? What's it do to the cap table? Do we give them observer rights? Do we give them a seat? And what about multiple ones? So whoever wants to grab that one and think of it as more our ecosystem and the pros and cons of it, and they came in early. Because despite what Peter, I don't know if you guys saw what Peter said, he said that the large, in pharma, they reach out and they extend olive branches to a lot of early stage new ideas and therapies, and we don't do it in the device industry. We've got a great example of large strategics coming in. They want to be part of the story. So whoever wants to grab that.
I could do a quick, I think the round we came in, Action Potential 2013, brought in 3.5 strategics. I count ourselves as a half strategic. And so that was the round. I think everybody kind of
I'm
came in.
meaning GSK, the GSK fund.
Yeah, was the half. Yeah.
Was the half.
Or the half, okay.
Correct. And, I think that's a judgment call. So I wasn't in the room when the decision made since we came in through that round. But I would say it was a bit of assuring that, listen, these were all logical acquirers. They were all in neuromod already. And they were looking to expand into large markets. Obviously, the incentive was to keep an eye on what could be a massive opportunity in the space. I think the judgment call, I think it's a little easier when you have a lot of folks come in simultaneously, because I think you can sort of treat everyone equally and fairly, and it's not so unrealistic to say, like, guys, this will be sort of, it makes sense for you to be part of these types of discussions around these topics, and, call it the open session, what have you, and manage the closed session differently. And so a lot of our companies have that dynamic. I don't think it's a negative. However, I do recall conversations I had around that time, even with like Jeff Martha at Medtronic, around this view of neuromodulation is ours. I think his exact words were something to the effect of like, Medtronic owns neuromodulation and we're not going to let folks take that from us. And, it was a sort of a friendly, competitive comment. As somebody new from the GSK side, I used to work at Medtronic, so no love lost in that. But I think the sentiment was, these are really big markets. Now, those strategics have to grapple with, how do we, back to the panel that we just heard, how do we redefine our vision of what neuromodulation, what bioelectronic medicines is, what our fundamental medical device model will be into the future, because this is a different call point. We don't have anything into some of these physician bases. And so I think that's still an element that medical devices as an industry is grappling with. And SetPoint is not going to worry too hard about that and focus on delivering and demonstrating. But I think it's something everybody should be paying attention to, frankly.
It's been fun to see the evolution of how we think about the strategics on the cap table since you and I have been in the industry. I mean, early on, everyone was kind of afraid of what they were going to do, but it's evolved. I mean, if you look at the statistics of the acquisitions over the past 10 years, and you probably know better than I do, Brenda, but like something like 90% of the companies have some kind of strategic involvement before they're acquired. So it's a good indicator that they like the space that you're in. Then it's how are they going to play in the sandbox? Like, what we worry about is if they want rights or they want to block other people from being in. And we've been fortunate with SetPoint that all the strategics have wanted to be on the same playing field. They all acknowledge the potential of the space. I think the tension for us is like, how much of the sausage making do we want the strategics to see? And so, as Juan-Pablo was alluding to, I mean, we manage our communication, but also we have a fantastic team. So the sausage making's been pretty smooth. So it's been good. So it's I think in general, strategics have been a value add, but you just have to make sure that they're playing by the right rules.
Yeah, agree. No, I agree. I think having a strategic involved, one or more, brings validation. It really helps get your round done. And if it's friendly terms, then it's perfect. It's an opportunity for the strategic to get closer to a project and really understand it better, which should be good, and makes them smarter. Also gives them a discount on the
Very large
exit.
price. You just told them they're going to pay for it.
Exactly. So that's also good, and it really helps the ecosystem. So I encourage more of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And in this case, they're all observers, right? They're able to hear the board meetings, get certain information. So, Brandon, what do you think about then when you see that on a cap table with an investment? Is that a good thing? And when should people pull in a strategic?
look, I think that, to Zach's point, strategics have become a very big part of the funding ecosystem in devices, right? I mean, it just maybe 10, 15 years ago, less so, but now it's become really important kind of piece to it. From my perspective, it's a great validator strategically of the interest in the technologies and the markets. I think as you think about it, it's kind of critical to think about how you minimize, longer term exit pathways. And, they work in different ways, of whether it's, trying to grab rights, or, they take, very large positions and, try to own 25, 30% of the company. And, that obviously has implications on how other people think about it. Because, if, for example, Medtronic owns 30% of your company, Boston doesn't always like paying Medtronic a ton of money, right? So, so those are just kind of different considerations that you have to think about. But if you can keep it clean, like, I think it's a great addition, generally speaking.
And do a lot of strategics want acquisition rights when they're investing?
I think they all like to ask for them. I'd say that it is less common than more common that they actually get those rights. And I just think as companies or in advising companies, I think you really have to fight to try to preserve the flexibility.
Is a right of first refusal, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is that one a safe one to go, that they have a chance to acquire at the same price if somebody gets an offer?
That's also still not ideal. I'd say if you found yourself in there, maybe a notification right would be the
Farthest.
the best thing. I mean, a lot of it. Part of the reason why they like being involved in these stories is like they don't want to wake up one day and find out that their big competitor struck a deal and they didn't get a call. If they're in the cap table, pretty unlikely that you're going to do a deal without giving them a call, right?
What's a notification right? What's that look like?
So if you get an offer, they have a right to be notified that an offer exists, and there may be other kind of terms around that.
And that's generally a safe way to go with a strategic on the cap.
It is probably the safest way if you're going to go down a rights path.
Yeah, the safest first
in
step.
the spectrum of it. Ideally, you don't give anything up, right? And that should be the goal of everybody, is to avoid giving up any sort of strategic rights. But yeah.
Okay.
Brandon, you see a lot in the public markets, and how do you think SetPoint, as an example of a company that kind of serves both devices and arguably pharma markets, how is that likely to be received, or have you seen had conversations that inform that?
Yeah. It'll be interesting. Look, I think that right now they're kind of in this phase of kind of proving out kind of the commercial thesis to this, right? And being able to kind of tackle the rheumatologist and connect them with the neurosurgeon and, connect the dots in ways that really just have not existed yet. I think as they continue to do that and kind of grow into the business, and it's going to create some opportunities for them to kind of think about ultimately taking the company public and what that looks like. I think as it relates to the biopharma piece, I think it's to be determined on, when you look at the existing cap table right now, it's very heavy, medtech investors, right? Just typically speaking, biopharma investors, they just look at our businesses very differently, right? And even strategics, like, biopharma strategics, they don't understand, a lot of the stuff that we do, device manufacturing and reimbursement nuances.
Sales rep, everything's just different.
Yeah, it's very different. So I think that's a piece of we're still going to have to flush out to see how much of that. But I mean, if you were to ever think there was a story that should appeal to that side of healthcare, biopharma investors, biopharma strategics, is this story, right? I mean, this is one of the biggest biopharma markets out there, and it's completely exposed.
Yeah,
exactly.
Which is what makes it such an attractive thing. And selfishly, from the device side, we shouldn't want to give it up, right?
I mean, and also to the earlier discussion around how we thought about the strategics, the fact that SetPoint has a viable IPO story, the optionality of that, made you think about the calculus a little bit different. I mean, 90% of medtech companies are acquired and don't go public, and so when you're in that situation, how you think about your strategic interactions, a different calculus. And we like the optionality that we have at SetPoint. We can kind of choose our path.
Exactly. And many of these biologics are going off patent. They are extremely at risk, and they're also being targeted by the government. as being price controlled and bringing in, generics, and so it's or biosimilars. So they're under a lot of pressure. This is a unique platform that could help them save their business.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting.
So Ankit, build on that. What's the cost of care of a patient on the SetPoint therapy versus on a biologic? What's it mean to the payer system?
Yeah, just to set some background, for rheumatoid arthritis, the mainstay of treatments are biologics like Humiras or JAK inhibitors, which are the Rinvoqs. It's hard to watch TV without watching an ad for Rinvoq or Skyrizi these days. And on average, they're about $60,000 to $90,000 annually for these therapies, and that's why it costs the healthcare system so much money. Our value proposition is our device cost is less than 1 year's worth of cost, but one-time implant gives you 10 years of therapy. So we've done a formal healthcare analysis, which is under review for publication in a health economics journal, and we demonstrate that with SetPoint Medical's product, the payers would break even within 15 months. And the lifetime cost of savings is in hundreds of thousands of dollars compared to putting them on a biologic. A big part of that is also, you're talking about lessons learned, is the label, the indication statement that we were able to study in our pivotal study and then ultimately get approved for, which is at par with essentially the latest and the greatest biologics and JAK inhibitors, which is not, you fail 8 different drugs before this device becomes an optionality. It is after the first biologic, inadequate response, loss of response, or intolerance, which is exactly the language that the drugs use. So I think that's a big part of our strategy as well. And as you talk about lessons learned of disrupting pharmaceuticals, that was a very active discussion we had with the FDA while we were designing our pivotal study to ensure that if you were going to be on the same standing with these biopharmaceutical products on the market, our indication statement had to match that.
Yeah.
When I look back at some of the critical decisions, I think that was definitely one of them, because for the longest time, the FDA wanted us to test this therapy in combination with the biologics, which would have completely removed a lot of the advantages that we've been able to demonstrate in the therapy. And I wasn't an investor at the time, but that was a hard and long, difficult decision, I'm sure, but it ended up being 100% the right thing to do. And so really, it kind of drives home the thought that knowing the problem that you're trying to address and the product profile that you want to achieve and matching your clinical strategy to demonstrate that is one of the most important decisions you make early on in the company.
In combination with drugs, but also the other decision I recall is should we only enroll patients that have failed multiple biologics?
That's right. Good point.
One?
Yeah.
And I think the decision was to, and Josh, I remember some strong discussions around this topic strongly, and I think you're right, that we should go after the single biologic failure in those studies, and that again shows up in the label. So those are powerful TAM modulators as well.
Yeah. It was clear from the patients that that's what they wanted. It wasn't that I want to try 6 biologics and then I'll think about this. Like they wanted to try some even before a biologic.
Yes. Well, you saw that in the enrollment in the trial, right? How many patients just failed? 40%. One patient and wanted to jump into a device trial, implanted with a device, right? An experimental device,
they didn't even know it was turned
off of one failure of a drug. It was that bad.
Plus,
that says a lot to me, right?
It does.
And Ankit and team did a great job in terms of our patient recruitment or DTC. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was amazing.
Yeah, and that was another big component of our strategy early on. We got this question frequently around, would patients and rheumatologists want to prescribe a device, especially an implantable device? Would patients who now have oral pills as an option, would they choose to get a device implanted? So we took a fairly strategic but methodical approach to it. We did a formal patient preference study doing discrete choice experiments, like a very rigorous way to understand what type of patients would choose this therapy and what would be the drivers, what would the outcomes need to look like for them to opt for SetPoint versus just switching to another biologic. And all of that fed into our clinical study design, how we recruited for the study. And so I think just, again, in the vein of what's being shared, having a good sense for what market we want to tackle and what we want the product to look like allowed us to make those investments early on and go after those patients to study them.
Now, didn't you get further evidence with X-ray or ultrasound?
That's correct.
How compelling at the end of I don't know if you can talk about this, but how compelling does that data look of the control group compared to the treated group?
Yeah, so just again, broadly speaking, our approach was what will it take to convince rheumatologists to offer this therapy to their patients? And it was clear when you have 12 FDA-approved biologics and oral therapies, the bar for data is going to be high. So we chose to understand our data through 3 different lenses, for lack of a better term. One was absolutely clinical signs and symptoms. So what was the disease activity improvement? What were some of the response rates as measured and defined by the American College of Rheumatology? So at the same level as what the drugs are being measured at. Then we also looked at the biomarkers that Juan-Pablo mentioned. We did serum biomarkers work to show that we are fundamentally changing the immune response before and after stimulation between sham and control arms. And then the third lens was objective evidence through MRIs. So all of the patients in the study got MRIs of the hands and the wrists, and we demonstrated that we reduced the rate of erosions by 50% in the patients who are at a significant risk of erosions with RA, and that all of those things combined has resulted in the enthusiasm that we've seen from the rheumatologists, because we have the data both clinically as well as objectively speaking that biopharmaceutical companies gather.
I think there's something to that investment in the science, because the early days, a lot of investors would push back and say, well, rheumatologists are so conservative, and how are you going to convince them to refer a patient to surgery? And obviously we're in that go-to-market now in an initial launch phase. But it's kind of been a stark difference in reality based on the evidence that the company is able to show them, because they lean in. This is a new mechanism. They're kind of tired of not being able to offer patients more options. The evidence that has been developed is not just sort of leaning on historical validated biomarkers, but embracing new, again, MRI and objective endpoints that are more increasingly interesting to the leaders, the opinion leaders. And so, I remember going to the first rheumatology meeting and expecting just a ton of pushback, and walking away feeling like people were all trying to get into our meetings, trying to hear about the story and the science, and nodding heads as to why they believe this works. In fact, I remember a lot of the pushback, some folks would say, listen, clearly it works. Like, you're showing, and clearly you know how it works, but now how do patients embrace this life? And those are the kinds of questions you love to hear from what is thought to be such a conservative society and specialty.
Yeah. Matt, we tailored our clinical trial to the audience, the physician audience. I mean, we ran the largest clinical trial in rheumatoid arthritis in the most difficult patient population. As Ankit mentioned, patients had failed, 40% had failed one biologic, 60% had failed multiple. Some of them had been on 6 or 7. No drug has tested that patient population. And so I think the fact that we took on the hardest assignment, but delivered the results is what was key to this physician population, because they are very scientifically and clinically driven in their decision making.
And the other key is that it wasn't just symptomatic improvement, which I think a lot of people could say, well, people are in a trial, they're more likely to say something, but we have objective evidence in the joints, which was a high bar, and might have not gone our way, but now that exists, it creates a really high bar for the space. I think as other entrants are looking at this, that's the bar. And I give credit to Dave Chernoff, our medical director, for setting a really high bar and saying, this is what we need to do. If this is real, then this has to be true. And turned out to be true, which is great.
Yeah.
It's real.
Ankit, what are you hearing from the street, from the rheumatology community after the study, the results have been announced?
Yeah, so we're early on. We're into the second quarter of our launch. So with that caveat out there, the general excitement is palpable. They haven't had a new mechanism to treat rheumatoid arthritis since 2012. And even with that, it was essentially the same as, will immune suppress a specific pathway, inhibit a pathway, and the benefit of that is your symptoms are controlled. The downside is now you have to live in a bubble, scared of infections, malignancies, etc. So having a completely differentiated therapy has driven a lot of enthusiasm, especially amongst what you would typically consider the trailblazing rheumatologists or the early adopters of any therapy, folks in the private practice who have grown up in the biologics era and have struggled to manage their patients beyond the available options. So the rheumatology excitement is great. We've seen that go, as Juan-Pablo mentioned, go from skepticism maybe in 2018 at the American College of Rheumatology to intrigue as we were enrolling the study, and some of the anecdotal data were being shared amongst the investigators to then, I think we're now pushing the envelope to drive a little bit of enthusiasm in the therapy. The neurosurgeons, especially the functional neurosurgeons who implant a therapy, for them, this is really exciting. The form factor is exciting to them. The fact that they can treat a whole different disease condition is exciting to them. And at the end of the day, we're seeing a lot of great interest from the patients as well, which is the ultimate true north for us.
The thing is, really important that we get this set up right? Like we are building this market. But you are building the market right, and I have no doubt that we could toggle up the patient interest, if we really wanted to pretty quickly. Like this is a type of product that, pharma advertises to patients all the time, right? And there's ways to kind of get out to them in very efficient manners and build awareness. But if the infrastructure is not set up right to handle it, and we're not ensuring that the doctors are getting the right early clinical results that we want to see, then it doesn't work over the long term, and something that should be $10-20 billion opportunity, gets messed up out of the gates.
Absolutely. And that's a part of our strategy. We are right now in only six markets. We'll expand slowly, and the idea is learn, refine, and grow to ensure that we launch this the right way.
Yeah.
So our clock is broken, but apparently we're running out of time. Maybe one quick question for Brandon is you said something that was interesting on our call. Is you talked about valuation of companies, and you talked about pulse field ablation and what it did to market cap for the large strategics. Now you've got a new white space in this area. What kind of things does the investment community see for a company like SetPoint?
Yeah, I mean, look, I sincerely believe that, this has the ability to be, 10-20+ billion dollars. I mean, you think about the opportunity in RA alone, and we haven't even really talked about how this is really a platform. There's a whole series of other indications that come along with it. Look, I'm in the business of selling companies too, but I'll tell you, like, the bar is really high on this one, I think, from a strategic perspective, at least from my perspective, to there's so much of the hard work has already gone into getting to this point. And now, like, there's about to be this massive value creation event for the shareholders who, you think about the journey that the company has been through. If someone's going to step up, I think that it has to be a really, really meaningful way. Yeah.
Well, I'm hoping for an IPO. I'm hoping the company can build a great platform. So thank you for everybody for participating. Greatly appreciated. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Berger.